What if I told you that a simple pocket watch could erase you from time itself, that a single turn of its key could transport you to a place you were never meant to be? This is exactly what happened to Richard Hale, an antique dealer who stumbled upon an old, forgotten watch in a dying town and was never seen again. But the strangest part, his disappearance wasn't the first, and it wouldn't be the last. Tonight, we uncover the chilling mystery of the vanishing watch of Black Hollow, a true paranormal encounter that will make you question the very fabric of time. Stay with me if you dare. Richard Hale was a man who spent his life surrounded by the past. As an antique dealer, he hunted for rare and valuable objects, searching estate sales, flea markets, and forgotten attics. He had seen many strange and unusual items in his years, but nothing compared to what he found in Black Hollow, Pennsylvania, in the summer of 1987. Black Hollow was a small, nearly abandoned town tucked away in the hills. Few people lived there anymore, and most of its buildings were falling apart. Richard had heard about an estate sale at an old Victorian house on the edge of town. The owner, an elderly woman named Eleanor Finch, had passed away, and her belongings were being sold off. Richard arrived at the house late in the afternoon. The place had an eerie stillness to it. The wooden floors creaked under his feet as he wandered through the rooms, searching for anything of value. That's when he saw it. A small, beautifully crafted pocket watch resting inside a glass case. The watch was silver with delicate engravings along the edges. Its face was slightly yellowed with age, but the hand still moved as if it had just been wound. What caught Richard's attention was the note attached to it. The handwriting was shaky, as if written by someone in distress. "Do not wind the watch after midnight. It does not belong to this time." Richard smirked. He had heard plenty of superstitions over the years. People loved to attach ghost stories to antiques, hoping to make them seem more valuable. But Richard was a skeptic. To him, this was just another old pocket watch, and if it was valuable, he wanted it. He bought the watch for a few dollars and left Black Hollow, not knowing that his life was about to change forever. Back at his shop, Richard examined the watch closely. It had no brand or maker's mark, which was unusual for an antique. But what really unsettled him was how cold the metal felt, even after being in his warm hands for several minutes. He shook off the feeling and decided to test it. That night, as the clock in his shop struck midnight, Richard sat at his desk, holding the watch. He hesitated for a moment before turning the small key to wind it. The moment he did, the air around him grew heavy. A strange pressure filled the room, like the feeling before a thunderstorm. Then, without warning, his vision blurred and his surroundings melted away. When his sight cleared, Richard was no longer in his shop. He was standing in a train station. But it wasn't just any train station. The architecture was old-fashioned, with wooden benches and gas lamps lining the walls. A massive clock above the ticket booth read 2:13 a.m. The air smelled of coal and oil, and distant voices echoed around him. People dressed in early 1900s clothing bustled about, checking tickets and boarding trains. Richard's heart pounded. He recognized this place. It was the old Black Hollow train station, except it had been demolished decades ago. Before he could make sense of what was happening, Richard noticed someone staring at him from across the platform. A tall man, dressed in a dark overcoat, stood motionless, his face pale and sunken. His eyes were dark, hollow pits, and he clutched something in his hand, an identical pocket watch. The man slowly lifted his arm and pointed at Richard. His lips moved, forming silent words. Richard felt a wave of dizziness crash over him. The sounds of the station became distorted, like a record playing at the wrong speed. He felt himself being pulled backward, the world around him stretching and warping. Then, blackness. Richard woke up with a start, gasping for breath. He was back in his shop. The watch lay on the desk, its hands frozen at 2:13 a.m. At first, he thought it had been a dream, but something felt off. The air was still unnaturally quiet. The lights in his shop flickered, and when he looked outside, his stomach dropped. The street was not the same. The buildings around him were different, older, more worn down. The neon signs from the bar across the street were gone, replaced by wooden storefronts. The modern cars that had lined the road were missing. Instead, a single horse-drawn carriage stood in the distance. Richard stepped outside, his breath hitching in his throat. He wasn't in 1987 anymore. He was in Black Hollow, but not as it was. This was Black Hollow from decades ago, back when the train station still existed. Panic surged through him. He turned back to his shop only to find that the sign above the door no longer read Hale's Antiques. It had a different name, Finch and Company General Store. That was Eleanor Finch's family store. And then Richard understood. He hadn't just seen the past, he had stepped into it. Desperate to find a way back, Richard clutched the pocket watch and tried to wind it again. His hand shook as he turned the key, praying that it would send him home. The moment he did, the same crushing sensation filled the air. The world around him shimmered and wavered like a reflection in disturbed water. A loud whistle pierced the air, the sound of an approaching train. Richard turned toward the tracks. Standing on the platform was the pale man. Only now Richard saw his face clearly, and he realized it was him. His own face, older, hollowed out, trapped in the past. Before he could scream, the world collapsed into darkness. The next morning, Richard's shop was empty. His employees found the store exactly as he had left it, but Richard himself was gone. His car was still parked outside. His wallet and keys were on the counter. The only thing missing was the pocket watch. The police searched for him, but no trace was ever found. Some believed he had run away. Others whispered about the watch, about the legend of the Black Hollow train station and the disappearances connected to it. And then strange reports began to surface. People passing through the ruins of Black Hollow claimed to hear the distant sound of a train whistle, even though no trains had run there in over 70 years. Some even claimed to see a man standing on the old station platform, his face pale, holding a silver pocket watch, waiting for someone else to take his place.